Hey everybody, Aaron Count, Sage Dynamics, and this is a Trijicon RMR CC. Because one of the most popular gun categories, if you will, right now is the slimline high-capacity guns, such as the Glock 48, SIG P365. You've also got the Springfield Hellcat and some other guns that kind of fill that role. There's been a larger demand for what I call the micro red dot sight, something in that category. Probably the most venerable, the most well-known, or the one that I would say has been around the longest, at least in that small footprint category, is the Shield RMS RMSC, which has the unofficial honor of having what's considered to be the standard footprint for that particular category of optic. A lot of optics share that footprint because they were one of the first ones to do it. In fact, you'll know if you've looked into it, the Glock 48 MOS, which is what I have here, defaults to that footprint, which is problematic when we get into some of the other optics, but that's not what this video is about. This video is about Trijicon's first foray into that category of micro red dot sight with the RMR CC, ruggedized, miniaturized, reflex sight, concealed carry. When the RMR CC was first announced, it was received with great fanfare, and some people looking at it thinking like, okay, I don't get it. And I was in the second category, to be perfectly honest with you. The RMR itself doesn't have a significantly large footprint, and it can be adapted to these smaller guns. However, and this is a problem that's also shared by people who like to put optics on 1911, there's a little bit of overhang involved. And some people that bothers them cosmetically. But it can also be a functional issue for waterproofing and snag concerns. The RMR CC at first glance is just a Trijicon RMR Type 2 made smaller. However, there are some changes internally. I would actually say improvements internally over what you get with the Type 2 RMR. Now the RMR CC is available in two different dot sizes, 3.25, the most venerable dot size that Trijicon offers in the RMR package, and 6.5 MOA. It is a significantly smaller window, relatively speaking. Obviously, the actual measurements themselves aren't significantly noticeably from a reading it on a piece of paper standpoint smaller, but there is a dramatic decrease in window size comparable to what we're getting into with the optic itself and its overall footprint. 8 brightness settings, 1 super bright, and then I have 2 night vision settings, which to me makes me think that the electronics package that's in the RMR CC is the same electronics package that's in the Trijicon SRO. Further evidence to that is I now have that button lockout mode, which means I can set auto brightness, but I also have a button lock-in mode, which is a feature that is somewhat unique to the SRO over the Type 2 RMR, and the fact that I can choose my brightness setting and lock that brightness setting in perpetuity, if you will, which is a feature that I always wanted on the RMR Type 2. Instead of that 16-hour go back into auto mode reset, it's something I didn't really care for. So with the RMR CC, I can pick a brightness setting, I can set it. Now one thing, and I was briefly in this category as well, it was confusing, is the markings on the RMR CC talk about 1 tick equals 3 MOA, alluding to the fact that it's 3 MOA adjustments, which is not true. You've got traditional one click equals 1 MOA, but every hash mark is going to give you 3. From hash mark to hash mark, there's 3 MOA between there. The reason for that confusion is the fact that the RMR CC doesn't have those tactile clicks that some people got used to with the RMR, but I still have a more fine-tuned adjustment method available to me. So if you're considering the RMR CC, you don't have to worry about having 3 MOA of adjustment every time you make a small turn on the windage or the elevation. So the markings, I wouldn't say they're misleading, they were just misunderstood by the internet at large, and myself briefly included, until I actually started staring at it and thinking about it. I was like, well, that can't be the case. Of course, if you've done any research into the RMR CC, you know that it's still a bottom load battery, 2032 powered bottom load battery. And one curious thing, at least curious to me, with the RMR CC, which is a departure from a lot of other optics, is they removed the recesses for the recoil lugs, the recoil bosses. So there's no, basically it's mounted to the gun based on the shoe, which is the actual milling cut or the plate, and then the screws themselves. So there's no additional support for rigidity for recoil. going into the review, I wondered, is that going to be a significant issue? Now, the optic is, people can put it on whatever they want, right? But it's intended for these smaller guns, or for those who don't want a little bit of overhang on those slimmer line slides like you get with 1911s. This might be an optimal choice for something that thin. I mounted it on a Glock 48 MOS, which is what a lot of people want to do, and I'm here to tell you right now that it's going to require a compromise, and that's because Glock went with a very short footprint, the RMR C shield sight footprint, which means because the RMR CC is longer than that sight, it cannot fit inside that footprint, that milling shoe, if you will, without an adapter plate. And even with an adapter plate, as you can see, mine sits very high because that's the only way it can sit on the gun. So some people's dreams of a factory-ready mounting solution from Glock have been dashed. Now, that's not to say that you're not going to have easy compatibility with other guns, because not everybody carries a Glock, right? But getting in the review process, I was going to do 2,000 rounds. The only departure for this optic, because I'm mounting it on that Glock 48, is there's not going to be an actual 500 round dedicated burn down. I still did 2,000 rounds, but I just don't have enough Glock 48 magazines to do 500 rounds in a go, and I'm not going to rapid reload magazines in order to provide that purpose. So I still do the 2,000 round review. Nothing else in my evaluation changes, except you don't get that 500 round burn down. So let's get right into it. First thing I notice about the RMR CC is the fact that it doesn't have a significantly reduced overall height, which makes using backup sights that are non-suppressor height problematic. And that's something a lot of people look for in their micro red dot sights, is something that's going to allow co-witnessing with standard height sights. Me personally, I don't care. Backup sights are backup sights. If they have to be a little bit taller in order to co-witness through that window in the event that I need them, which is going to be unlikely but possible, then that's fine. But some people, they have this desire to want to just put the optic on the gun and not have to change out their backup iron sights. Okay, that's fine. This optic, depending on what it's put on, may or may not give you that opportunity because it shares a very, very almost identical height to the traditional RMR Type 2. So you're not getting anything significantly different there. Reticle quality is what you'd come to expect from Trijicon. I got some really good brightness, and of course I already talked about the features themselves. And just to my eye, and some RMRs can vary from unit to unit slightly, the dot is very crisp when target focused. Everything is behaving like it should behave. Refresh rate is good. Glass clarity is good. Yes, you still do have a little bit of that blue tint. That blue tint is there on purpose. That's a notch filter, which limits the certain types of light transmissions through the glass, which allows the red dot to appear to the human eye without having to crank it up brighter and brighter and brighter, which would significantly reduce battery life. And for battery life, you're getting what you'd expect from an RMR. You're going to get optimal, right in there between 2 to 4 years, depending on brightness setting, if you turn it off during storage or something like that. But even if you were to turn it on and leave it on, you're going to get at least a calendar year, probably significantly more than that. But my advice to everyone is every year change your batteries out just in case. Now, in using the RMR CC, just incorporated into my usual practice as well as the way that I evaluate optics. And one of the ways I evaluate optics is just their general use in shooting. I'm very familiar with the 3.25 MOA dot. However, I am using that dot size in now a significantly, well, not significantly, a relatively smaller window compared to the RMR. I gotta be honest with you, I didn't really notice the reduction in size of the window going from an RMR Type 2 to the RMR CC. And there were plenty of days on the range during the evaluation process where I'd have a full-size RMR gun that I was doing something else with, and I'd pick up and put, 200, 300 rounds to the RMR CC. I didn't notice a significant change. In fact, sometimes if I wasn't really consciously aware of it, I felt like I was just shooting the full-size RMR gun. Now, when you put them side by side, there is a noticeable size difference, but in the actual use of shooting, because I'm target focused, as long as I have the optic lined up with the target and everything's going the way it's supposed to go, the window size was never noticeable. Of course, window size is something that a lot of people desire. Here's the thing, you can't have your cake and eat it too kind of situation. You're not going to have a very slimline, quote-unquote, concealable optic and have a gigantic window. You're going to have to pick one. Of course, for some reason, the thing that a lot of people fixate on with my reviews is the drop testing. And I had considered coming up with a different testing procedure for an optic like this, or an optic in this category, the micro red dot sight, because I don't feel like it's an optic that's going to be, or at least I don't think it should be considered for non-concealed carry, such as duty use. Those optics should have a higher degree of durability, of course, because they're exposed to the world, whereas concealed carry is a little bit more protected depending on what your occupation is or your daily life. But also the windows should be a little bit larger, just to accommodate a higher likelihood of dot acquisition for those situations. Of course, that's a very arguable thing because it's a very subjective conversation. Even the term duty use is very subjective, and I'll be the first to admit that. But do I want to get away from my normal testing procedure? I don't. In fact, I can't at this point because I've kind of already tethered myself to it when I reviewed the Holosun 57K, because I put that through the exact same process, minus, of course, the burn down, because, like I said, same gun, really, or, well, Glock 48. I don't have enough magazines to do that burn down, and to be perfectly honest, it would be problematic to do that anyway. So everything else is going to remain the same, and that's also the behind-the-scenes testing, the heating of the optic, the freezing of the optic, all the stuff that I never really put on video because there's nothing really sexy about it, and I already got people complaining about video length as it is, so why add stuff like that? People are just going to fast forward through anyway. The only time something like that's going to make it into a video is if I actually recognize an issue while I'm doing it, like, oh, okay, let me film this real quick because this just happened. So we're still doing our same 2,000 rounds, one-handed manipulations, and of course the drop test. Did not depart from the drop test for what I consider to be a dedicated concealed carry optic, as I would with a duty optic. So you're still getting one drop test every 500 rounds. Now, before we get into those, let's look at a 5-round group I fired at the zero distance of 25 yards on the Glock 48 MOS. So that was our initial group fired with the 124 grain gold dot. Glock 48 should be considered just as reasonably accurate as what you'd get out of a Glock 19. Same barrel length, although barrel length in that area can be pretty negligible as it is. I've considered that to be a respectable group, especially for the dot size, the distance, and the gun that it's mounted on. I fired that from a benched, bagged position. And then, of course, I did the drop test every 500 rounds. Absolutely nothing surprising whatsoever. I did not encounter any damage to the optic lens itself. I've got some cosmetic damage to the body, but the RMR holds up like I would expect the RMR to hold up. And just by making it slightly smaller, they still maintain the overall shape and geometry, so I was expecting it to be reliably boring when it comes to not damaging or taking any damage during the drop test. And of course the question after that is, did it maintain zero? So here's a 5-round group I fired after the 2,000 round review process, after the final drop. Same ammunition, same distance, I would call that zero maintained. So how do I feel about the RMR CC? Well, I'm glad it exists. I'm glad Trijicon has an optic for that category. However, I wish they would have paid more attention to providing things that people are asking for. I would have liked a top or a side load battery. Trijicon's already proven that they're capable of doing a top load battery, so I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be one on the RMR CC. I wish that they hadn't come up with yet another unique footprint. So it's even a departure from the RMR footprint. And I get they kind of had to do something different because there was no way that this was going to fit on the RMR footprint because it's smaller than the RMR. So they probably had a conversation about, do we use someone else's footprint, which is something Trijicon's never really done because they like to be in front and be kind of the trendsetter, if you will, in footprints, because the RMR's footprint is considered the unofficial industry standard. A lot of optic companies default to that footprint. I don't think Trijicon wanted to use someone else's. I don't know if that was a conscious decision or what, but they ended up coming up with yet another unique footprint, which isn't a big deal if you're going to have a gun milled. It is a big deal if you can't have a gun milled. So if you have to use an aftermarket adapter plate, and we're talking specifically about those optics-ready subcompact guns, as far as the Glock 48 goes, you're out of luck. Now, I'm using a C&H Precision adapter plate, which has been a solid plate throughout the review process. So you can almost consider this a review of the C&H plate as well, because it assisted in this thing maintaining zero and staying functional throughout the review process. However, because of the shoe, and I've kind of already talked about this, I can't mount it directly to the gun. I can't get down lower, so I would have to add some pretty tall backup sights to this gun to give me my backup iron sights. if I was intending to carry this gun for concealed carry. Because I'm using it just for review process, I wasn't too worried about switching out the sights that are on the gun. Other guns like the spring-fed Hellcat or the SIG P365, you're going to have to see what adapter plates are optional out there, because the footprint is a departure from what's kind of become the unofficial standard. And that is a little bit problematic. Other than that, and obviously really the only complaint I have, and I wouldn't even really call it a complaint so much as you could have done this, you had the opportunity, was to get away from the 2032 battery. We've already had a few optics out there proving the 1632 battery provides plenty of energy in order to get an optic through a calendar year. So let's go with that battery. You don't have to go down to a 1225, that's kind of silly. But the 1632 is going to provide the energy you need. So let's get a side load or a top load. The ability was there, I believe. And I think because of, well, you know what, I'm not really, I don't know. I don't know why they didn't do it. There's enough room. I mean, there's more than enough room. In fact, there's plenty of room to get that battery in there. So I don't understand why they didn't do it. I'm still happy with the optic, but there are reasons why I can see myself not using it, and that goes back to just the footprint itself. It's a little bit problematic. I'm going to have a gun milled, or I'm going to have to get a gun that I don't currently own, aftermarket OEM systems such as like a SIG P365 or like I said a Springfield Hellcat, in order to be able to carry this, which is something I don't want to do. So it's kind of an odd man out type of optic. Now I will say, once there's adapter plates available for it, it's something I would definitely run as a backup sight on a rifle. I think I would like this a lot for rifle purposes, for, you know, to kind of get rid of the iron sights altogether on some of my guns, or my magnified optic guns where it's problematic to use iron sights as it is. If I'm going to run a 45 offset, I could see using the RMR CC for that. Or, you know, if you want to mount it on top of your ACOG, your LCAN or something like that, I'm sure there'll be options for that as well. On its face, it is a good optic. On its face, it's a very good optic for the slimline guns, the smaller guns, the high capacity slimline, micro compact, whatever you want to call them. But I don't see it being a significant replacement for other optics that I already have in this category, or full-size optics that I use on carry guns, because I still carry a Glock 45, so this isn't something I would put on that gun, because there's no reason not to put an RMR on it or a comparable optic. But if you are looking for Trijicon's answer for the micro red dot sight, the RMR CC is a good optic. However, you are going to have to consciously be specific on what you're going to put it on, because if you're trying to put it on like a Glock or a similar gun that has a smaller footprint or a shorter shoe, you are going to have to compromise in that area because of the limitations of mounting based on the footprint that they went with. Now, that being said, Trijicon has always been one of the most popular red dot sights, so I can easily see the aftermarket coming up with better solutions for the problem. In fact, if you have a 48 MOS, there's no reason why you couldn't have it milled out additionally more to accept the optic down into the shoe instead of having to sit above it. But as far as durability, functionality, and features go, the RMR CC is a great optic, aside from, you know, those small little complaints that I have, which ultimately I'm used to bottom load batteries already with the RMR, so it's not a big deal. I just would have liked to have seen them advance in design in that. The electronics package is a significant improvement over the RMR Type 2, which I like to see, and I'm glad to see that we're going to see that moving forward with the next generation of Trijicon optics. So if you're considering RMR CC and you're already made aware of the potential issues that you may have depending on which gun you're going to put it on, it's an excellent choice. I'm Eric Count with Sage Dynamics. Train accordingly.